When it comes to serving static files, we have these three options which I discussed earlier in this module, and currently we're using the leftmost approach. We're serving those static files with Django itself. And that works, but it's not ideal, as mentioned before. So therefore now, as a next step, I instead want to utilize the web server, which we already have in our Elastic Beanstalk environment, and which you have no matter which hosting provider you use, to serve those static files separately. So to not funnel the requests to those files through Django, but to instantly detect such requests and return the files without touching or without reaching Django. That's the next goal. So still the same server and the same machine, the same computer, so to say, but static files and uploaded files being served separately. For that, we'll need to change the web server configuration. And for this, keep in mind that the web server is not Django, but instead a separate server which is set up and configured by our hosting provider. Elastic Beanstalk is also not our server, it's just a tool that sets up our server for us. Instead, our actual server can be seen here if we have a look at configuration. It's nginx in the end. Now this is the server which is serving our applications. Now we can tell that server how to serve our static files and to serve them separately. We do that by adding a new file in the .eb extensions folder. And that's the static-files config, which is another config file which will be picked up by Elastic Beanstalk, in this case to then change its internal nginx configuration to make that server serve static files differently. For this here, in this static files config file, which you should name exactly like this, you again add option_settings : and just as before, make sure you have no typos in here. And then, new line, 2 blanks, AWS : Elastic Beanstalk : environment : proxy : static files : to tell Elastic Beanstalk that we want to change the static files configuration. And then in a new line, and again indented by 2 more spaces, we now need to tell Elastic Beanstalk and nginx, which it uses, for which kinds of URLs, so for which kind of requests, it should serve which folders. And that's something we configured before in settings py and then also in URLs py. To be precise, we already have the configuration there for Django that requests to our domain /media URL should serve the content from media root, and for static URL should serve the content from static root. We now want to remove these lines, since we no longer use Django for that, and have a look at the values for those settings in the settings py file. Static URL is /static/, media URL is /files/. Therefore, we want to go to static files config and add /static, and in a new line /files : so the exact same settings as we have them here for static URL and media URL, just the trailing slash can be omitted. And then in our static files config, after the colon, we need to point at the folder which will contain those static files. In this case, that would be the static files folder for the static files and the uploads folder for the uploads. So here we point at static files and here at uploads. And we're always referring to folders in our project folder with that. So if they would be in some subfolder, you would have to provide a nested path. With that, we're instructing the nginx web server to handle requests targeting /static or /files, and then some file, with the files stored in these folders. And our Django application will not be reached at all for such static file requests. That is this solution in the middle being applied. Now for this to have an effect, we need to save all files and of course redeploy. So I will again zip all those files together And of course, you could also look for some process, some CI/CD process, which automates this, but I'm deliberately not doing this here since I really want to focus on the manual steps to make it as transparent as possible what's going on. So once all these folders and files have been zipped together again, we can go back to our Elastic Beanstalk application here and upload a new version. So upload this new zip file here and click deploy. And now again, this will be uploaded and deployed, and these changes will then go into effect there. And this web server for the static files will also be updated. So let's wait for this to finish before we then give it a try. So now this did deploy again, and it's looking good. Image is being loaded, styles are being loaded, and this is now served back directly by the web server without going through our Django application. We can also try uploading things by going to posts and adding a new post here in the admin panel. Test, this is a test. Pick any file of your choice. I'll pick this one. This is some test. Let's see if that works. Add an author, of course. We need to do that. Maximilian. Schwarzmuller with some email address. So click save here. And add a tag. Awesome. And save this. That's looking good. It was saved. And if we now go back to our main page, so not to the admin area, we see that post and we see the image, which proves that it works. Let's also try adding a comment. This is a test comment. And that also works. So all that functionality works now with files being served by the web server instead of Django. Now, when it comes to serving those files, we also have a third option. And that third option is that we use a dedicated service for serving those files. So not just the same server serving them separately, but a totally different service. A totally different machine in the cloud in the end, if you want to put it like that. That is another option. And the advantage here could be that there are services which are really fine-tuned for this purpose, which are really built for serving files in the best possible way. And therefore, we're also going to have a look at this approach. But for this approach, we'll also have to make a couple of changes, because we'll no longer store the static files or the uploads in our project folder. For example, when we collect the static files, we no longer want to generate the static files folder here. Instead, all those files, both the collected static files as well as ongoing user uploads, need to be forwarded to that server which should serve them thereafter. So they need to be uploaded to that server, not just uploaded to our server and our Django application, but to that other service which we might be using. But thankfully, that is also quite straightforward to implement.